In the beginning of time, the Creator Lord, Eru Ilúvatar, brought forth several subordinate gods, known as the Valar, tasked with assisting in the creation of the world through a magical chant. Only Eru had the ability to create life. The lesser gods' jobs was to prepare the world, thus creating mountains, rivers, and forests to shelter the most important creations, elves and humans. Melkor was the most powerful among the Valar. However, from an early age, he was envious and disagreed with the way Eru's creation of life was handled. When the Valar sang the great song before Eru, Melkor took the opportunity to release his dark thoughts into the song, and discord immediately rose around him. Some of the closest Valar tuned into Melkor's music, and two musical themes warred before the divine throne. When Eru concluded the song, he scolded Melkor. He told him that whatever he brought into existence would still be connected to Eru's power. Melkor's envy turned to hatred, and he began to harbor contempt for all living things. Melkor often isolated himself in the Great Void, where he tried unsuccessfully to create a world according to his vision. Unable to conceive something original, Melkor used his powers to corrupt everything he touched, such as Balrogs and Orcs. Besides these evil beings, Melkor manipulated in his favor some former companions of the Valar. One of them, Sauron, would become the Dark Lord's most faithful servant. A great war was fought between the Valar and the dark forces of Melkor. The battle between the heavenly beings had such an impact on the world that mountains were shattered and oceans churned. The Valar homeland, called Almarin, was also destroyed during the war. Then, the Valar went to the far west, where they built the heavenly city of Valinor, and invited the elves to live with them. In Valinor, the Valar also established new sources of light for the world, the two trees, one to provide golden light during the day, the other to provide silver light at night. Melkor coveted the light of the trees and conspired to destroy what could not be his. This opened a conflict with the Noldor, an elven tribe living in Valinor. Aware of the evil that dwelt in Melkor's mind, the elves began to call him by the derogatory name Morgoth, which means dark foe. Fëanor was the most exemplary elf of the Noldor, known for producing precious stones and creating the Silmarils, three magical gems that capture the phases of light from the Valinor trees. Since he could not have the trees of Valinor for himself, Morgoth became obsessed with the Silmarils, organizing a raid on Valinor to steal the jewels. Morgoth summoned the giant spider, Ungoliant, to attack and consume the power of the two trees until they dried up, aiding him in his invasion of Valinor. The trees were destroyed. In the dark and confusion, Morgoth looted the Silmarils and fled eastward across the sea. Morgoth placed the three Silmarils in a black crown, which he proudly displayed on his head. In response, Fëanor and his 7 sons made an unbreakable oath. They would kill anyone who kept them away from the Silmarils. Defying the Valar's advice, Fëanor rallied the Noldor elves to pursue Morgoth across the sea. 6 centuries of bloody battles, betrayal, and tragedy followed. Fëanor died from his wounds inflicted by Gothmog, the Lord of the Balrogs, during the battle under the stars. Morgoth's fortress, called Angband, was surrounded by a large army of Noldor elves. Morgoth was challenged by Fingolfin, Fëanor's half-brother, to a duel. Morgoth came out of the fortress in great strides, which sounded like thunder on the earth. He wore black armor, carried on his head the crown with the Silmarils, and had groaned the hammer of the underworld as his weapon, as well as a great iron shield. The duel was fierce. Flames emerged from the earth with every blow of Morgoth's hammer, but Fingolfin was faster and avoided all the powerful strikes. Fingolfin wounded Morgoth 7 times. Although Morgoth cried out in anguish, he was too powerful to die. Fingolfin was already exhausted from the fight and was struck by Morgoth's shield, falling to the ground, almost dying. When Morgoth put his foot on Fingolfin's neck to break it, Fingolfin, in one last blow, ran his blade through the Dark Lord's foot, and Morgoth's blood gushed out. The enraged Morgoth crushed Fingolfin, though he was left permanently limp from the injury. Sometime later, all of Middle-earth was still apprehensive in the face of Morgoth's fury. The War of Wrath began when the half-elf Arundel sailed to Valinor seeking help against Morgoth in Middle-earth. The Valar forces, along with the Vanyar and Noldor elves, traveled to stop the hateful enemy. In the ensuing battle, Morgoth's army was almost completely destroyed, and only a few dragons, Balrogs, and Orcs survived. The fortress of Angband was destroyed. Morgoth fled into the deepest tunnel. Even so, he was captured by the Valar, taken prisoner, and locked up in the ends of the world, in the Great Void, so that he would never return to Middle-earth. The Silmarils were plucked from his iron crown, but were eventually lost entirely shortly thereafter. The lies that Morgoth instilled in the hearts of elves and men created a perennial and indestructible seed. Sauron, his most powerful servant, remained loyal to his master's memory. For many centuries, he tried to put the world back into chaos. Even defeated and imprisoned, many prophesied that one day Morgoth would return, starting a great war that would spell the end of all things. Orcs are among the most common minions of the Dark Lords of Middle-earth. They were corrupted creatures, and, like all corruptions, orcs multiplied easily if they were unopposed. Therefore, hundreds of thousands of orcs have marched alongside the Dark Forces. The origins of orcs is controversial. The most accepted theory is that they descended from the first elves, innocent and naive beings. Some were captured by Morgoth, the first Dark Lord. These elves were imprisoned and tortured. Using pain and suffering, Morgoth corrupted the first elves, turning them into the corrupted creature we know. Morgoth and Sauron used the orcs as their infantry base. Because there were so many of them, they were used as cannon fodder by their masters, as the fallen orcs were quickly replaced by new ones. Besides being used in warfare, orcs were also servants or slaves, performing extremely grueling tasks. These orcs were even more expendable than their warriors and had the name Snaga. Uruk-hai were the strongest and scariest forms of orcs. Sauron and Saruman the White were able to create armies of Uruk-hai. These orcs were even more bloodthirsty than the ordinary orc, and the Uruk-hai, enslaved as berserkers, were almost unstoppable. The orcs in Middle-earth had limited intellect. They acted on basic instincts, feeling an enormous hatred for elves, men, their masters, and themselves. Driven by this hatred, they worked, fought, and tried to survive. Sauron is known by many titles: Lord of the Rings, Lord of Darkness, Lord of the Werewolves, and Lord of the World. Still, he is considered the Nameless One, whose name should not be pronounced lightly. Sauron's origin dates to the beginning of creation, when the Supreme Being, Eru Ilúvatar, brought forth a group of spirit creatures known as the Ainur. 14 of these Ainur became the Valar, divine leaders of the universe. The remaining Ainur became known as Maiar, lesser but still powerful spirits. Sauron, who originally received the name Mairon, was part of the Maiar. He was a pure and orderly being at first, who studied the craft of forging. But as time went on, Sauron became selfish and began to harbor a sense of dissatisfaction with the way other Maiar were leading the creation of the world. Sauron was eventually seduced by the promises of Morgoth, who had once been the most powerful Valar, but turned evil and went on to wage war against his former companions. Sauron, always obsessed with order and perfection in all things, he believed that Morgoth would be able to create a perfect world, unaware Morgoth's true intention was to destroy all creation. Once on the path of darkness, Sauron quickly rose through the ranks of the evil army, serving as Morgoth's lieutenant. Sauron gained a fearsome reputation during this period. As a spiritual being of great power, Sauron changed forms numerous times during the First Age, assuming the form of a werewolf or vampire when he was at the height of his power. Eventually, the Valar attacked Morgoth and took him back in the chains to Valinor. But Sauron escaped and remained in Middle-earth. After the War of Wrath and the defeat of his master Morgoth, Sauron fled for a time to the east. For 1,000 years, Sauron was not seen in the west of Middle-earth. He went to the mountainous land of Mordor and began to build his mighty dark tower of Barad-dûr. With Morgoth trapped in the ends of the world, Sauron emerged as the second Dark Lord. He raised armies of orcs, trolls, and humans, luring them with promises of wealth. To attract allies from the powerful elven kingdoms, Sauron took on a new form. He became the beautiful Anatar, the Lord of Gifts. In this guise, he visited the elves, presenting himself as a friend with whom they could share his profound knowledge. He continued to use this disguise for the next few centuries, during which time he became friends with an elven lord named Celebrimbor. Celebrimbor was the most skilled craftsman in all the elven kingdoms. Obeying Sauron's instructions, he began forging the Rings of Power. A total of 19 rings were forged, which had powerful magics, ready to be activated at the right moment by Sauron, with the intent to imprison the minds of their users and manipulate them in his favor. Once the rings were made and distributed among men, dwarves, and elves, Sauron secretly created another ring, the One Ring, forged on Mount Doom in Mordor, controlling the other rings using dark magic. On the One Ring, Sauron inscribed the following words: "One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in darkness to bind them." The elves received 3 rings, the most powerful after the One Ring. The dwarves were given 7 rings, and men 9, for Sauron knew that the latter would be the easiest to corrupt due to their greedy nature. Sauron became the Lord of the Rings, but his plan failed. As soon as he placed the One Ring on his own finger, the elves, who had their own rings, sensed Sauron's evil presence in their minds and immediately took the rings off. Enraged by his failed plan, Sauron declared war against all the kingdoms of elves, men, and dwarves. He demanded that all the Rings of Power be given to him. The elves managed to hide the 3 most powerful rings, but the other 16 were captured by Sauron, and they were destroyed or lost. The 9 human kings who were given rings were all corrupted. They became the Nazgul, spectral creatures and Sauron's greatest servants. Sauron managed to defeat many elven armies and dominate much of Middle-earth. However, when it seemed that he was about to destroy his enemies, an army of humans appeared to rescue the elves. These humans were known as the Númenóreans and lived on the island west of Middle-earth. The armies of men and elves blocked Sauron's invasion, and he was arrested and taken to the island of Númenor, where he remains captive. Even imprisoned, Sauron counted on cunning and devised a plan to destroy Númenor. In a few years as a prisoner, Sauron gained the trust of the king and many lords of Númenor, promising them immortality if they would assemble a fleet and a large army to attack Valinor, the ancient holy land of the Valar in the west. Inspired by the desire for immortality, the humans of Númenor committed the blasphemy of setting sail and attacking Valinor. Then the creator god Ilúvatar sank the rebel fleet of ships and the island of Númenor. Sauron was captured in the catastrophe and his physical body destroyed, which caused him to permanently lose the ability to change shape. Even without his physical body, Sauron's spirits returned to Middle-earth. Weakened by his activities and creation of the One Ring, Sauron fled again to Mordor, where he built a new body and regained his strength. But before he regained some of his power, Sauron learned that some of the survivors of the Númenóreans had gone to Middle-earth and had established the kingdoms of Arnor and Gondor. Fearing the strengthening of these new human kingdoms, Sauron led a war against them. The exiled Númenóreans responded by forming the last alliance of elves and men, joining with the elven king Gil-galad. During this war, Sauron single-handedly fought and killed the human king Elendil and Gil-galad. But Elendil's son, Isildur, took his father's broken sword and cut the One Ring from Sauron's hand. Since the ring contained much of Sauron's power and soul, he lost his body when it was removed from his hand. His armies fled, and Sauron's broken spirit escaped to Mordor, where he hid again. For much of the Third Age, Sauron remained hidden, but always acting as an evil force, instigating the Orcs to gather and attack the human realms. Sauron knew that, if he recovered the One Ring, he could once again assume a physical form. So, he sent the Nazgul in search of the ring. To Sauron's misfortune, the One Ring came into the hands of a small being named Frodo Baggins, a hobbit from the Shire who inherited the ring from his uncle Bilbo Baggins. After going through many adventures and hardships, Frodo arrived at Mount Doom. The One Ring was thrown into the incandescent lava of the volcano, where it was finally destroyed. Feeling his source of power being dashed, Sauron's shadow rose like a huge dark cloud in the sky. His right hand rose as if he wanted to crush the world in his last breath. But a great wind blew and the cloud was dispelled. Sauron was totally defeated and disappeared from Middle-earth. The Nazgul, also known as the Ringwraiths, are among the most frightening beings in Middle-earth. With their terrifying screams, they make the hearts of men, elves, and dwarves tremble. These powerful Black Knights were Sauron's most loyal servants. These specters were invisible to the eye. Only their black cloaks and silver armor could be seen. But the Nazgul were not always like this. During the Second Era, there were 9 kings among men, but they were seduced by the rings of power, with the promise of wealth, prestige, glory, and of course, power. At first, the promises seemed to be fulfilled, but the men bearing the rings of power were deceived by Sauron. Using the ring, he came to control the ring bearers of the rings of power of men. They became the Ringwraiths and started to serve Sauron's wishes. They became reputed as his most terrible servants and battlefield lieutenants. The Nazgul were led by the Witch King Angmar, the strongest Nazgul. He practiced dark magics and was also a formidable warrior. With his terrible weapon, he slaughtered dozens of enemies. Riding his winged beast, he dominated the skies. The Nazgul could not be killed by normal men and weapons. But they had a weakness. They avoided fire and water. Being associated with darkness, they could also be repelled by light. They had cursed daggers known as the Morgul Blade. Those who were wounded by this weapon had a terrible outcome if they were not treated in time. They would become cursed specters. Fear was one of the Nazgul's greatest weapons. They also had a power known as Black Breath, which contaminated those closest to them. Their victims were overwhelmed by fear and a terrible malaise, which could be fatal. The Nazgul were given the mission of retrieving the ring from Sauron, for their master knew that the Black Knight scrupulously obeyed his will and deserved complete trust. On their march through Middle-earth, the Nazgul spread terror as they carried out their master's designs. The Balrogs are known as demons of the ancient world, and they are certainly among the most feared beings of Middle-earth. With flaming weapons and a blazing whip, almost nothing could stand up to them. They were originally part of the race of the Maiars, supernatural beings that appeared in the beginning of creation. Given their divine origin, their power was almost immeasurable. These powerful beings were seduced by the strong and proud Melkor, who later became known as Morgoth. He convinced them to join him by resorting to lies and bribery. During Melkor's rebellion, and together with Sauron, the Balrogs began to serve the first Dark Lord. During the First Age, the Balrogs fought Morgoth's enemies and came to control extensive territories. Apparently, there were never more than 7 Balrogs, but each one had so much power that it could throw any battle off balance. Among them was Gothmog, with the title the Lord of the Balrogs, as well as being one of Morgoth's marshals. Gothmog's downfall came in his duel with the powerful elf lord Ecthelion of the Fountain. At the end of the fight, both combatants died. The Balrogs were defeated, along with their master, in the War of Wrath. Several died, but some managed to escape. Only the fate of one of the survivors is known, Balrog of the Mines of Moria. This mighty Balrog hid in the depths of Moria for 5 millennia, until it was awakened by the subjects of King Durin VI. The latter, due to his greed and avarice, dug too deep, trying to find the precious mithril. The brave dwarves tried to fight the mighty creature, but their weapons could do little against a fire demon, and they were driven out of Moria. In this battle, the monster killed the dwarf king Durin VI, and the Balrog became known as Durin's Bane. Sometime later, the dwarves tried to regain their territory, but they were unsuccessful. Only a much more powerful opponent could take on Balrog. The monster met his greatest opponent when the Fellowship of the Ring entered his territory. The wizard Gandalf the Grey opposed the creature and tried to block its path so that his companions could escape with the ring. Balrog and Gandalf fought for several days and nights in an epic duel. In the end of the battle, Balrog was killed, as was Gandalf the Grey. But the wizard rose again in the form of Gandalf the White, the one who defeated the mighty Balrog.